On today's episode of the Critical Mass Podcast, we are talking to educator, musician, organizer, former councilman Jecorey Arthur. Stick around. This is a conversation that matters. Welcome to the Critical Mass Podcast, where we discuss all things ADOS and build the critical mass needed to fight for reparations and a transformative Black agenda. I am your host, Simeon, and today's episode is being sponsored by the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. That is the American Descendants of Slavery Advocacy Foundation. And we are in for a real treat today. Our guest is none other than Jecorey Arthur. And before we bring him up, I'm going to read Jecorey's bio. And I'm going to read the whole thing because this is a multifaceted brother, and I think you need to know more about him. So, Jecorey Arthur is a professor at the historically Black college and university, Simmons College of Kentucky. Arthur has dedicated his life to education, serving students of all ages in schools, libraries, parks, community centers, detention centers, prisons, and boys and girls clubs. He has also trained other educators presenting at conferences and colleges across the US and overseas at England's De Montfort University. He holds certifications in human subject research and quality matters, teaching online, along with a bachelor's in music education and a master's in teaching from the University of Louisville. Arthur is currently pursuing a doctorate in education from Antioch University with the specialization in social justice. At Simmons College, he has taught music, sociology, and activism while leading community based participatory action research on projects such as the Kerner Commission's 2.0 Black Asset Mapping and Universal Basic Neighborhoods. Arthur is a multidimensional musician, performing as a percussionist and vocalist around the world, from Switzerland's Young Frau Es Saul Festival to Tennessee's Big Ears Festival, Louisville's Forecastle Festival, New York's 92nd Street Y, and the Percussive Arts Society International Convention. He's an endorsed artist with Sawyer's Percussion, an instructor at the Louisville Academy of Music, and an artist roster member of the Inner City Muslim Action Network. His recording and composition work spans theater, film, television, radio, podcasts, and studio albums, while his live performances include soloist appearances with professional orchestras in Baltimore, Brooklyn, Cincinnati, Columbus, Dallas, Dayton, Indianapolis, Miami, Nashville, Phoenix, Pittsburgh, Portland, Richmond, San Diego, San Francisco, St. Petersburg, and Calgary, Canada. Notably, Arthur is the first hip hop artist to perform with the Louisville Orchestra, premiering the folk opera The Way Forth and starring as Muhammad Ali in the rap opera The Greatest Muhammad Ali. And just like Ali, Arthur's personal adversity inspired his political advocacy. As an activist, he worked on issue based campaigns for education access, fair wages, police accountability, and tenant rights. In 2019, he became a Black Male Engagement Genius Fellow, using his cash reward to help open Parkland Plaza, a green space, community venue, and natural playground in his childhood neighborhood. His community work led him to run for Louisville Metro Council in 2020, and upon winning, he made history as the city's youngest legislator. During his 4-year term, he sponsored and passed more than 150 pieces of legislation to fight poverty, discrimination, violence, and homelessness, including the Anti-Displacement Law, which created America's first tool to measure the displacement impact of proposed developments. Arthur is a proud union member of the American Federation of Teachers, KY 120 United, the American Federation of Musicians, Local 11637, and United Musicians and Allied Workers. He is also a member of the American Descendants of Slavery Advocacy Foundation, where he organizes campaigns, writes policy, and trains activists. You all give a critical mass welcome to Jecorey Arthur. What's going on, Jecorey?
Peace. How you doing, bro?
Pretty good. Now, was it hard hearing all that about yourself? Because I insisted on reading that whole thing. So was
It
it
was embarrassing. I've never heard it out loud before. You know, it's really not for me and my consumption. It's just something I put together when I'm speaking or when I have some sort of engagement that asks for it. But it made me think of all the things that were in it and just the work that went into it and the people that I met and the experiences. A lot of special moments in that biography.
I think depending on where someone meets Jecorey, you may learn a different part of Jecorey. And I met you in more of an organizing fashion, but quickly learned that you were also a musician. And I remember we were having a conversation one day, and I said something about a B sus chord, and you were like, "Wait," and we were able to quickly bond on music. But I kind of am really interested in your transition or your matriculation through all of these different areas of focus into this combined triple or quadruple threat that you are. So, from a musician perspective, you've talked about music as a lifeline, or you looked at it as a lifeline to you and your friends. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So, being able to make music, especially Black music, is revolutionary in itself as a creative. We are making music that's not only reflective of the times that we're going through, but really reflective of the future that we hope to have. So when I'm, preteen, a teenager, and I'm making music with my friends and family, it's keeping us out of the streets, but it's also giving us a way to have an outlet to talk about what we observe in those streets or what we experience in those streets. And so many of us have practiced that art form in one way or another, whether it's beating on that lunchroom table or like we did, where we got a karaoke machine and cassette tapes and we're recording in my closet in my bedroom. We're really just trying to express ourselves and do it in a way that's peaceful, do it in a way that is creative, doing it in a way that felt new and fresh to us. So music was always something that just kept us out of trouble. And then even in the classroom setting, if I wasn't in my concert band program at school, if I wasn't in the drum line, wasn't in the marching band, I probably wouldn't have excelled in school. That was my incentive to do my best. That was my incentive to show up. That was my incentive to be on my best behavior so I could participate in that band contest, so I could participate in the drum line. So a lot of times when we think about these arts programs, that they can absolutely be life-changing, but I always use the phrase life-saving because I don't know where I would be without access to those programs. They really help me not only express myself, but also really discover myself.
Speaking of access to those types of programs, one of the things I know about you is that you are in the community and sharing your gift with kids, with uh, adults, with all of the above. Can you talk a little bit about your utilization of music and music education in the community and how it helps bring us together?
Yeah, so if my band director didn't, take me under her wing and accept me into that program, even though I was wilding out every now and then, if she didn't, become the mentor that I desperately needed in that school, like I said, I wouldn't be here. I would have taken a totally different path in life. And I noticed that whenever I'm teaching my family and friends how to make beats, how to write songs, how to play instruments, it's enriching them in the same way. So, eventually I started to realize I'm already a teacher, even though I'm in high school right now. I became the drum major of my high school's marching band. And that leadership opportunity helped me develop some skills that I still use to this very day, whether I'm thinking about a group of people who I'm trying to organize as different instrument sections and different instruments playing specific parts, or I'm thinking about how we're only as strong as our weakest player or our weakest link. Because if you got a horn section and one person's out of tune, it could throw off the whole chord, it could throw off the whole section. So I take those skills that I learned as a musician and I apply them to everything else that I do in life. But I really wanted to reach out to other students, to other families, because I saw the impact it had on me and everyone that I've been able to work with and teach and build with. I always saw the value in it. I always saw the reward in it. Of course, the go-to career for a musician is to quote unquote blow up. You want to be rich and famous. But in my opinion, I think the most valuable, most rewarding career that you could take as a musician is to be a music teacher, because it's not just about making a bunch of money. It's about really making adults, helping those students become the best human beings that they can be, because you learn so many different disciplines within that art form. So that was the career path that I chose. It holds, a dear part of my heart still to this day. I'm in schools teaching private lessons. So I don't know how, me, but I'm still with that sixth grader and we're working on paradiddles and rudiments. Like, it's always something that I'm gonna cherish and favor, just because it got me to where I am today, and I know the impact that it can have on another student. So I'm always willing to be a music teacher and always working on bettering my craft as a musician, because it's a tool that can be used to bring people together. And once you bring people together, whether it's in a music venue, a classroom, a community concert of some sort, then you can start building with them and working towards, some of this social and political change that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Well, and you said some interesting stuff. You talked about music and kind of compared it to community, and needing to be in tune with each other, um, and needing to really be in concert. What are your thoughts around just community engagement and activism and the need for the Black community to be in concert as it pertains to issues that matter with us?
Whether or not we are involved with our government, any branch, with people in our community who have decision-making power, those decisions will be made. And I was talking with a group of kids earlier, a group of fifth graders, and I told them, if we don't get involved, somebody is still going to be making a choice about your school, about your community center, about your library, about the apps you can and cannot use on your phone, about what you can and cannot wear to school. I think Nina Turner said it best. You might not do politics, but politics will do you. Now, of course, I didn't say that to the fifth graders, but I really wanted to, because if we don't get involved, people are going to be making, really dire decisions about our everyday lives that could have, fatal consequences. A perfect example, we talk a lot about voting and how important it is to vote. But oftentimes when you vote, you are giving away your power to an elected official. I believe wholeheartedly in a theory of change called organizing, where you as a people, you as a community are building power. And then at that point, of course, you can put up your own candidates for office, but regardless of who's in office, because you've built that community power, you can hold any elected official accountable, because the voters are organized. They know what they want, they know what they need, and they can exert their power as voters on that person. So we have to, work on coming together in concert, because we largely don't have that. If you look at our community across this country right now, I would say that we're probably not playing the same music. We're not reading from the same hymnal book. We're on different measures in the music. We're all over the place. Some of us don't have access to the resources we need to even be a part of the organizing community. But once we get to a place where we realize everyone has a gift to offer, whether you are standing on the podium, leading the whole ensemble, you're in the trumpet section playing that horn one part, maybe you're in the back in the percussion section playing timpani, or you're playing triangle. I don't care what part you play. Everyone has a part to play, and everyone has to do their best to refine those skills so that we can all play those parts together. And that's really the only way that we're going to move forward.
And just like with an ensemble, those parts come together to make the sound, to make the song, to make the thing needed for our community. So when I first heard your name, it was around 2020. And it was during a time where Kentucky had a lot of turmoil, specifically around a young lady, rest her soul, Brianna Taylor. And for those that don't know, Brianna Taylor was killed by police in her home in Louisville, Kentucky on March 13th, 2020. And that was during a no knock raid that was executed at her apartment. Um, and I heard about you because you were making noise in Louisville about bringing the killers of Breonna Taylor, some police, to justice. And so, how did that situation impact you, and how did it propel your organizing and your activist efforts?
So when people are trying to build power, when they're organizing, it can be disheartening because you oftentimes are really like just trying to get people to get involved, trying to get people to pay attention, trying to get people to care. So we come up with all of these different ways to raise awareness, whether it's showing up to events, handing out flyers, knocking on people's doors, trying to just have conversations on those stoops, putting out content online to try to galvanize people. We try so hard to get people to pay attention, to get involved. I would almost liken it to selling tickets to a concert, which is kind of how I ran my campaign in 2020. And when you do that, it can be exhausting, but nothing is more exhausting than some sort of critical incident or tragedy happening, such as Breonna Taylor getting killed by your local police department. Because then you have a flood of people, hundreds, thousands of people who all of a sudden are paying attention, who care a little bit or a lot of bit more about an issue, and who are looking for ways to take action and get involved right now. What I think propelled me to become such a large voice and leader in that moment was a lot of the conversation that was being had about racial injustice, about the way that Black Americans were being treated, ADOS was being treated. I was already talking about that because I had that anchoring from the ADOS movement. I had the anchoring of community power from the Iman organization in Chicago. I'm already doing, activism and organizing, working on tenant rights for seniors who were, essentially about to be in danger because their landlord was trying to do some work in the midst of the pandemic, organizing to make sure people had meals and food when the pandemic first started, working on arts and music education access. So I'm already organizing around these different issues. When Breonna Taylor was killed and, a recording of the 911 call was released, making it very clear that the police, raided her home, that her boyfriend didn't know it was the police, and that they shot back in a way that was just totally barbaric and animalistic. When that happened and Louisville exploded socially and politically, so many of us that were already doing the work as far as organizing and trying to make our city better, we had to show up in that moment. It was almost like everything else that we had done leading up to it was like practice to a certain extent. Smaller campaigns, smaller issues. In this moment, we had a hell of a lot of work to do because not only were we focused on managing a small group of people for a specific campaign, but now we had thousands of people that we had to keep safe. We had thousands of people that we had to give leadership and direction to. We had demands that were being broadcast across the entire world. Louisville was really looked at on the world stage in that moment. So as that happened, I realized really soon that as much emotion as we felt, we had to come out of it with something. We had to come out of it with policy, with permanent change. And there were so many people involved in helping us get some permanent change by organizing to work with our local Metro Council to pass Briana's Law, which banned no-knock warrants in Louisville, Kentucky. Eventually, they were also limited and heavily restricted at the state level, and there's still an effort at the federal level from Senator Rand Paul, actually, to create a Briana's Law across the entire United States of America. But we had to take that moment and we had to use it to make permanent change. And that was kind of the perfect, unfortunate storm between the pandemic, between Briana getting killed, George getting killed. We had to use the masses of people that were there for political pressure to make those changes that we know needed to happen.
That's awesome. And you've kind of seen it from both sides, which is the organizing activist side and from the legislator side, from being a councilman. How do you think the pandemic, when I think 2020, 2021, 29, I'm thinking pandemic times. How did the pandemic magnify disparities to you?
You probably heard the phrase that a rising tide lifts all boats. I hate that phrase, but when I think of that phrase, I'm thinking of how a rising tide lifts all boats. But if you don't have a boat and you just in the water, you're more likely to drown. So the pandemic really caused a situation where, the average American was struggling and suffering. So, the people who economically, politically, socially are suffering way worse than the average American are going to be hurting even worse than the average American in that moment, in that crisis. So, we noticed that, we struggle with access to healthy food. That was way worse during the pandemic. We struggle with health disparities and outcomes. That was obviously way worse during the pandemic. We struggle with our communities feeling safe. That was way worse during the pandemic because you have these institutions like the school, like the community center, like the church that were shut down and young people didn't have places to go with safe, loving adults. So we had all of these different problems that were really magnified and amplified in the midst of this pandemic. And then you add to the fact that, we're in the midst of this pandemic and ain't nothing really changed for us as far as racism go. It's gotten worse, but also we still getting killed by police. We still getting our door kicked in. I think one of the phrases I kept hearing throughout the pandemic we had was, it started way before COVID-19. It started in 1619. This is a slavery pandemic and we're dealing with it today. So, in the midst of that, again, it's important to be prepared. And if you are already doing that work to build community in whatever scale and scope that you could, whether it was a small campaign to get a speed hump on your street or a big campaign to get a law passed, if you were already trying to build power and build community in that moment, that was the time for you to show up. And I'm sure you did.
Mm. Now, after that moment, and after working with city council, working with organizations and other organizers, what pushed you to go ahead and run for office and become Councilman Arthur?
So as I was organizing prior to 2020, as I was teaching, as I'm, rapping about and singing about all of these problems, over time, I started to realize, I grew up, I became politically mature. Again, through the ADOS movement, through my connections with the Inner City Muslim Action Network, I'm realizing that if we really want to use our power, we need to be using it for permanent change. And that's policy, through passing laws, through changing laws. So towards the end of 2019, when I noticed that this council seat was open, I filed to run. And when I filed to run, I'm doing it, on the backs and the shoulders of our ancestors. I'm doing it with the ADOS movement in mind. I'm doing it with all the community organizing skills and the power that was put in me from everybody I had worked with prior. And when I come out, I'm talking about a Black agenda. I'm talking about reparations. I'm talking about all these things that people might say that, oh, that's radical, which really just means the root of something. I'm talking about the root causes of things, the triple evils that King talked about: poverty, discrimination, militarism, or violence. I'm talking about these problems. And it was almost like Louisville wasn't ready for that to happen. So I'm talking December 2019, I'm announcing, and I don't feel like Louisville's really ready for that yet. Some people are, but for the most part, Louisville is still largely asleep. When the pandemic happened, and these racial disparities that we already knew about started to get magnified and amplified, I started to make a little bit more sense for some folks. When Briana Taylor got killed, it made a lot more sense to folks. So over the course of 2020, we treated our campaign like I said, I was trying to sell tickets to a concert initially. But as time went on, the campaign was really just about organizing and building power to make changes in our community. Not after we got into office, but during that moment, whether it was helping people get access to supplies, anything they needed as far as masks, as far as sanitization, as far as food, whether it was building in that way, or it was trying to hold the Louisville Metro Police Department accountable, the mayor accountable, the Metro Council accountable. We were already moving like we were in office. And I say we because, I would have never gotten into office if it weren't for the movement that really put wind beneath my wings. I would have never gotten in office if it weren't for the team that I had around me. So as we're campaigning, we're organizing and building towards something. We're working on our platform and trying to actualize it already. And as people saw those examples, I think that's what helped me lead in that moment. We're talking about probably about a half a dozen or so candidates, 7, 8 candidates that are all talking about why they deserve to be in office. And we were showing people instead of just telling people.
Showing people instead of telling people. How important it is, how important is it, from the seat of a councilman for the public to be involved and for the public to be advocating? What difference does that make in your elected official mind? What difference does that make for you?
Well, we hear a lot that all politics is local. And what I learned after being in local, government is that it means it's faster. It's easier. Your senator represents your whole state. Your United States senator represents the whole state. In Kentucky, that's what, 4.5 million people. It's a lot harder to get access to that senator. Your governor is representing all those folks. A lot harder to get access to that governor. Even your state representative or your state senator at the local level, they are representing 30,000 plus people, 100,000 people, 150,000 people, depends on your population. But I bring that up just because your city council member might be representing 15,000 people, 20,000 people. In Louisville, it's about 30,000 people. It's a lot easier to get access to them, which means it's a lot easier to influence them to vote a certain way. A lot easier to influence them to sponsor a law, a lot easier to influence them to become a part of your campaign, your issue-based campaign. And because it's a lot easier to touch them and connect with them, you could be using that influence that you have that's so much more achievable to practice for a larger constituency, for a larger issue-based campaign, for a larger distance that you got to go to get to whatever that North Star is. So if you can't work with your city council person, it might be difficult for you to work with your mayor who's representing, all of the city. If you can't work with your mayor, it might be difficult for you to work with your member of Congress, because that district kind of overlaps with the person who runs the city. If you can't work with your member of Congress, it's going to be hella hard to work with another member of Congress across your state. If you can't work with them, it's going to be real hard to work with your senator. And then, of course, it's going to be real hard to work with the president of the United States. So I would almost liken local politics as, almost like level 1. If you want to play this game and you want to be involved in politics and you want to advocate at a larger scale, do it on a smaller scale first and work your way up. Just like when we practice in music, you got a hard lick, slow the tempo down, break it down piece by piece, and then build brick by brick. A lot of people think, it's real easy. I think maybe the internet got us caught up in this cycle where
everything's easy on the internet.
we puff our chest out and we think that we know it all. We think that we can do it all. But doing the work means practice. Doing the work means rehearsal. Doing the work means you are developing and building skills. Organizing means that you are developing and building skills that you can continue to improve on to get to where you need to go. If our North Star is reparations and we want to get the United States government, the federal government, to give us a debt that we know is owed, let's practice that at the local level by getting something in your city budget. Let's practice that by getting something in your state budget. Those are hard tasks, but I promise you, they will reward you and pay off later when we're trying to do a national campaign to get reparations.
I have such an appreciation for that because, you know, when you ran, you didn't decide to run for president as your first time out. Like, you ran for city council. You weren't trying to capture the entire state right away. You didn't go from no one knowing you to saying that you could run for a statewide office. You ran in the area that you lived, that you grew up, in the city that you lived, grew up, where you made your advocacy and organizing base. You ran in that area. And so to me, that also speaks to, hey, you have to take the right steps to move correctly and get what's needed to run for office. You talked a little bit about city budgets. And one of the things that occurred while you were in office was the American Rescue Plan. Can you talk a little bit about how, while on council in Louisville, you all utilize those funds a little bit differently than a lot of other municipalities? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I'll just start by saying something that sounds like it doesn't relate at all and say, when the 13th Amendment was enacted, you know, when slavery was abolished in the United States of America, it wasn't just like a group of politicians in Congress that decided to abolish slavery. When all of our civil rights legislation was passed throughout the 60s, it wasn't just a random group of politicians in Congress who just woke up one day and decided to give us civil rights and try to desegregate the country. It was community. Government action starts with community action. So we were able to take most of our American Rescue Plan funds, which are, you know, essentially coronavirus relief funding from the federal government. We were able to take most of our funding and put it towards housing. And when I say housing, I mean, you know, services for people who are unhoused, renovating shelters, home repair funding, down payment assistance for first-time homeowners, and also building brand new housing. Some of, you know, just regular affordable housing, but also something called permanent supportive housing, where if you're a senior, you can't work and you're disabled, you know, you should still get access to quality housing. But you're going to get access to that quality housing as well as a caregiver who's in that space, as well as a case manager who's in that space. So housing and a number of different actual services through housing, and also violence prevention. You know, programs where if you get into a violent altercation and you survive, they're sending case managers to the hospital to make sure you don't retaliate. They're helping you and your family relocate if you need to. They're helping you and your family get out of the state if you need to. They're making sure that communities have access to job training. You know, we put all of this money towards addressing root causes of some of our biggest local issues. And I'm proud of that because, again, it wasn't just a group of politicians who decided to do it. It eventually was approved and passed by our city council. But before that happened, we had community listening sessions where people showed up and told us, city council, this is how you need to spend that money. We had a community survey that went out where people showed up and said, this is how you need to spend that money. And I'm proud of the fact that I was one of a few of the city council members who were able to, you know, galvanize our followers, whether it was on social media, whether it was at a random town hall, whether it was at your church, get them to participate in that survey, participate in those forums, tell your government how they need to be spending your tax money. Because in Louisville, that is what happened. And I'm proud to say that the you know, City Hall, Metro Hall listened to that community input. And then we were able to turn around and spend our money in that way. Most cities, you know, on average, Brookings Institute shows are spending about 10 or 11% of their funding on housing issues. We spent about a third of our funding on housing issues because that many people said it was that important to them. So I'm proud we were able to accomplish that, because that money, it's being spent in all sorts of ways, or was being spent in all sorts of ways. And a lot of it just went towards, giving, government employees higher salaries, which they absolutely deserve. But what good is that higher salary if most of your time is being spent on, clearing a camp of people who just desperately need housing and are trying to survive? What good is that salary if you're trying to figure out how to prevent violence, but the people you're trying to work with and support don't have the resources? We were able to provide those resources with the American Rescue Plan, and I'm real proud of that work, because we're talking about billions of dollars that went to cities, and Louisville was able to really, capture that moment and do the right thing with that money.
And on that same note, I know according to Brookings Institute, when they look at other cities and cities across the country in relation to American Rescue Plan funds, almost half of that money was spent on government operations. So to do something really with the public and their interest in mind is really phenomenal. What was it like being kind of the fire starter in an already established body like city council, to come in? And I feel confident in saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, a lot of the things that you all accomplished, that was not the mindset of that legislative body before you walked in. So what was that like, being kind of the new guy, an activist, a guy from the area, an everyday guy to me? Like, you're really an everyday person. What was that like?
It was hard at first, because I think a lot of people had a perspective about me based on the protests in 2020. I think a lot of them are picturing Jecorey with the shotgun on his shoulder, at 28th and West Broadway, 28th Street, where David McAtee was killed by local law enforcement. Because I guess our governor or our mayor thought there was a protest, but really it was just Black folk hanging out and barbecuing. And, they sent law enforcement there, and he ended up, getting shot in the midst of all of that chaos. So there was a lot of emotions in 2020 that were just really high, a lot of tension that was really high. And I think my identity for a lot of the council members and my colleagues was that. I think they looked at me as just this loudmouth, all talk Negro. And I don't think they understood the mission that I was on, to use the power of the legislative branch to make permanent change. Because, and unfortunately, to their credit, there were a lot of people who might have been considered bad actors in the protest community. There were people who weren't thinking about long-term change. There were people who were really stuck in that moment. And there were also people who saw the bigger picture. Briana Taylor wasn't just killed because of, police being racist. The police were looking for drugs. They were looking for money. These were economic issues, of course, drizzled and sprinkled in racism. So as we're fighting this fight, I think a lot of politicians almost felt afraid, because, again, most people ain't paying attention. Most people ain't watching those city council meetings. Most people don't even know who that city council member is. But when somebody gets killed by the police, when there's this critical moment, all of a sudden people care and they move differently and they're paying attention. So it puts City Hall on notice. It puts people on edge. And then when I get in office, I'm one of those people. It was almost like a culture shock for me. But I can honestly say, as I got into office, there were a few people who embraced me, who were willing to work with me. And I don't know if they did it because they were just trying to check me, or, or trying to stun me.
Yeah.
But I learned how the system worked. I learned the legislative process, not just for like my benefit, but for all of our benefit, so that we could use it to do what we needed to do to make that permanent change. You have to use it. If you're in office and your job is to write laws and pass laws, you better figure out how that works. Otherwise, you're just keeping a seat warm. And unfortunately, so many of our elected officials, mostly the ones who've probably been in there for way too long, are not looking at the job and using the power in the way that they should be. It's very important that we hold our elected officials accountable, not just based on whatever we think it is they should be doing as individuals, but collectively having that community agenda and knowing that you are a legislator. We expect you to work on legislation. We expect you to pass laws. And when we got in office, we set that expectation because we're introducing laws, we're sponsoring policy, we're sponsoring ordinances, and we're also passing that policy. Unfortunately, though, the further we got from 2020, the less, I would say, the aroma of community fear and the fight against the status quo, the less that our elected officials felt that pressure. Because now, if you look at our local, city council, it's a lot more Republican, it's a lot more conservative. And I don't mean that as a knock at Republicans. I mean, the Democrats are also much more right-wing, much more conservative. Our mayor, people thought that our last mayor, who was, elected when Briana Taylor was good, they thought he was bad. Their current mayor is much more right-wing than that mayor could have ever been. And I'll bring that up because when we organized in 2020, we didn't sustain it. After Briana's law was passed, the people who were a part of that campaign and a part of that movement should have moved to other issues and fought to address other issues. I would even argue we could have moved to something beyond policing, because here we are today, and people largely don't pay attention to the police contract, to the police budget. When the police comes and has a public hearing at City Hall. So over time, we had demonstrations, we passed some legislation, but we should have focused heavily on organization. And that's why I'm proud of the ADOS movement, because what we've been able to do and take this organic movement and formalize it into chapters and have this transformational Black agenda has been so incredible. And I'm proud to say that at the local level, we've been able to pass some policies and really, again, practice for what that could look like at a higher level.
Now, speaking of passing policies, one of those policies was an anti-displacement law. Tell us about that, and what is an anti-displacement law and what's its impact on the community?
I'm proud of that law because most cities look at displacement and say, well, here's the risk. There's the risk. Those areas are at risk. Our tool actually takes the proposed development and not only says there's risk here, but here's the risk of your specific project to this community. And I'm proud of that. We worked with academics. Of course, we worked with community organizers, tenant organizers in Louisville who helped us pass that law, because if it were not for those collaborations, we wouldn't be talking about the anti-displacement law, which used to be the historically Black neighborhoods law that we talked a lot about at the ADOS conference the last time I was in Louisville. And I'm proud to say we took that feedback and we incorporated that input so that we can make the best possible law that we could. And we got it passed in 2023.
What's interesting about this anti-displacement law and other things like this is the utilization of tools to help us. And I think in the moment, AI and algorithms and all of those types of things are out there. And how to address algorithmic bias and the use of AI tools in public policy. Would you say that you all's legislation kind of set right in that place of utilizing different types of tools to help calculate things and make determinations?
Well, what's kind of beautiful about the technology is it's using the trends that already exist. And it's using those trends to say, this is what's currently happening. And based on the amount of housing units and the affordability of those units, this is what is going to happen if you put that development here. I was kind of like blown away by how simple it felt, but the fact that no other city had created a tool like that before. And it's important to talk about displacement, because as we think about the housing crisis and we think about the history of the housing crisis, I would honestly say that gentrification is the evolution of segregation, because segregation forced us to live in certain places. It kept us out of ownership. Whereas gentrification forces you to live and move away from certain places. It's really the evolution of it. So I'm excited because we were able to use that technology for our purposes. I'm sure developers, realtors, people are speculating all the time using the housing market for their benefit. I read not too long ago, one of our favorite platforms to find housing is using your searches to then, help raise prices or encourage people to raise prices, because it's seeing what you can and cannot afford every time you search. So in this scenario, we're using it for the benefit of the people who deserve housing. We believe that housing is a human right. We also believe that a government with limited resources should focus those resources. And I bring that up because, a lot of people who were in opposition to this thought, well, no development will ever pass that assessment. It's not about being anti-development. It's about being anti-displacement. If what you are developing doesn't meet the needs of our city and the needs of the people who desperately, need housing right now, why is your city government, why is the public funding it, supporting it, sponsoring it? That's a political question, but it's also a moral question. And we were able to win that argument, and the city council agreed with us, passing this law unanimously. I also want to add something else that we don't talk a lot about with the law. We have a history of redlining. We have a history of urban renewal. We have a history of racist foreclosure policies. That history can now be investigated by an anti-displacement commission that this law created. And once that history is investigated, and wrongful foreclosures, wrongful evictions, you figure out that the city government discriminated against you, and you go through that process, there's a restitution recommendation from the commission, whether it's to help you get new land, whether it's to help you with a down payment of a home that you want to buy in the future, help you repair the home you currently live in. But we now have a process to really help address the fact that so many of our families face discrimination by our own government. So not only are we going to limit the resources to make sure they address our current needs, but we're going to dig through those history archives and make sure that any past injustices are held accountable today. And that's the anti-displacement law.
That sounds like a hell of a law. uh, and what do you think it would take from the public to push this type of thing across the nation? And I know some other municipalities have attempted or taken up legislation like this since the groundbreaking passing of it in Louisville.
All it takes is somebody in your community to care about it. And then you're going to have to building community power, organizing community power around the issue of housing across our country. And then hopefully you have an elected official who cares about it, so that they can be the sponsor, they can be the champion. I, of course, care about the issue. I'm impacted by the issue. But if I didn't have a community of people outside of that council chamber, outside of City Hall, who cared about the issue, who could help galvanize, mobilize, and organize other constituents and other voters to show up to meetings, to write letters, send postcards, call, it would have never passed. Because if you just look at it as this policymaker sponsored this law and they're trying to get it passed, and you don't think of the issue affecting a whole community of people who are struggling with their housing, it's a lot easier to tell Jecorey no. You can tell me no. You can vote no on the law because you're telling me no. It's a lot harder to tell 5,000, 10,000, 30,000, 50,000 people who are telling you, I am struggling with housing because you keep funding unaffordable housing. You can't tell them no. And if you do, there will be political consequences.
Mm.
And I think it's important for other cities to recognize. And when I say other cities, I don't necessarily mean the government officials. I mean the other people in those cities, the tenants, the homeowner who's house poor. I mean the folks who care about addressing the housing crisis. You have power that you can use and that you can build to pass an anti-displacement law in your city. And the organization that I'm proud we partnered with was Push Louisville People United for Social Housing. They are offering those trainings. A lot of our ADOS chapters and members and leaders are going to be in those trainings so that we can pass those laws in other cities. Because the housing crisis, of course, is terrible in Louisville, but it's impacting most major American cities. But we have the power and we have an example of something that we could do about it.
Absolutely. You know, you brought up ADOS and the ADOS movement and the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. And I've had the opportunity to work with you within the ADOS Advocacy Foundation as a volunteer. And I think the first time we got to work together was as in a room of volunteers who were working on the ADOS Black agenda. And I remember it being so intense, and we were meeting every week, all volunteers, just writing agenda items, doing research, starting with research, and then putting uh, forth an agenda. So, how did you find the ADOS movement?
Being a teacher, being a professor at Simmons College of Kentucky, our president, Kevin Cosby, Dr. Kevin Cosby, had been following the movement for some years before I even knew anything about it, before I ever heard of Antonio Moore, Yvette Carnell, or the American Descendants of Slavery. And I followed him online. And one day I saw him retweet something that came across my timeline, ADOS. And I just went down the Twitter rabbit hole of ADOS until I found the YouTube channels and really just kind of binge watched the videos, learned as much as I could about the movement, and got the courage to go to the conference, I think in 2019, and met people. Because at first I was a little skeptical, like who these people on YouTube, who these
These
people in the
cats,
comments,
yeah,
who these
who are
people
these
on Twitter.
cats?
I had seen the bot talk, but when I went to that conference and felt the energy in that room and met people who I built lifelong relationships and friendships and kinships with, I could not be a part of the movement. I almost felt like it was um, my destiny to be a part of the movement. Of course, like growing up, I had read so much about the civil rights movement, about the freedom rides, the freedom school, all of these different movements and these organizations that existed in the past. And when I just learned the new perspective and the agenda and the approach and the precision of the ADOS movement, I knew I had found my political home. And I'm proud to say that I volunteered with the org. I have a leadership position with the org, and I'm a lifelong member of the org. And I want us to reach our North Star of accomplishing reparations for American descendants of slavery and implementing our Black agenda. So that was how I got introduced to the movement. It all it took was a tweet, and that's important to bring up just because as we talk about outreach, as we talk about organizing, for some people it just takes a tweet. For some people it takes showing up to that conference. For some people it might be a sermon. For some people it might be a YouTube video. For some people it might be a book. There are probably a unlimited amount of ways that you can reach somebody. So that's why it's important for everyone to hone in and understand that they possess skills that it could be used to help build our movement. For me, it took a tweet to being introduced to the movement.
Yeah, for me, it was a YouTube video that a vet had done, and maybe 6 months after that, they had the Angela Project in Alabama. And I went to the Angela Project and saw a room full of like-minded people who were following this ideology of self-defining are self-identifying this ideology of Black politics and the need for advocacy for policies that were important to us. I've also gotten to just, when I say you're like a multifaceted dude, I really want to just point out to our listeners, like I was at the second ADOS conference. The first ADOS conference, I was stream team, so I watched it live. I was working from home at the time. No comment. I watched the whole thing that day, right? And so I got to go to the second ADOS conference and actually contribute as well. And it was so wild to me because I watched you give a training, like an informative training, and then I watched you give a rap concert in the same day, right? And I met you, and we had just communicated via Zoom. And one, I didn't expect you to be like such a tall brother, because I'm 6 feet and I'm a true 6 feet, not like a pop the balloon 6 feet, which is like 5'9", but I'm like a true 6 feet. And I was looking up to you, and you were in all black with like this fly gold chain, and you had just finished rapping. And I remember I turned to someone and I was like, yo, I don't even know if I can comprehend what this dude is. Because because I had seen you just engaging people in training, and you had brought in a group to kind of explain how policies across time have impacted Black folks and created, or specifically ADOS people, and created the racial wealth gap. And then here you are rapping about liberation on stage, and you gave a hell of a performance. And then later, I, talked to you months later, and you were traveling somewhere to perform some percussion with an orchestra. And I was just like, yo, like this dude has no bounds. But one of the most amazing moments for me was joining the first outreach meeting where you started leading the outreach team of volunteers at the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. And I felt kind of that same moment in watching you launch the Kentucky chapter of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, because I feel like you just have a knack of communicating and reaching people where they are. One of the first campaigns where I really got to see you put together a campaign was the Claim the Name campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about the Claim the Name campaign and our really successful fight for disaggregation?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we had the Claim the Name campaign because, I talk about my introduction through that tweet, but being at that conference was like such a surreal moment for me, almost like an out-of-body experience, searching for my political home all these years and finding it in the ADOS movement. In that conference that I went to, the sub-name was Claim the Name. And here we are years later, formally in an organization with the opportunity to tell our federal government that we want to claim the name. So the White House, the Office of Management and Budget, who is in charge of, controlling the federal spending, they were changing the way that they took data related to race and ethnicity and asking for input about it. So we had a chance, after all these years of talking about how important it is to identify as American descendants of slavery, we had a chance to make that real and actually make it happen. So, the outreach team had already been working on training materials, and we took those materials and created a toolkit to share with ADOS members across the country, to tell them exactly how and why and where and who, to answer all the details about how we can best fight to get our data disaggregated. And I'm proud of that toolkit just because it was like a work product that people can have, and you see the benefit of being a part of a formal organization. Again, going back to the music analogy, people contributed with their skill set, with their different parts to make that music, to make that product. So we created the toolkit, also created a training series that a number of our leaders, including you, were able to facilitate and train about 1,000 people across the country on how to actually advocate for this policy, for this change. And I'm proud that we did that, because it was practice. It was a chance for us to figure out how we use all these different tactics, put them into a larger strategy, use our skill sets, turning what we had into what we needed to get what we wanted. That's organizing. We organized for something. And at the end of it, while we'll look at it and say, well, we didn't get exactly what we wanted, we did get some sort of change. We did get recognition. We got recognition not only through people recognizing that ADOS, specifically deserves to be disaggregated and further studied, but also, the term African American, which we know we have issues with, was clearly looked at as a different ethnic indication compared to so many other levels of what could be considered Black. So I'm proud of the fact that we were able to actually educate our federal government on something that we've been saying for years now. It also gave us a chance to figure out how other organizations are moving in that space. You might be familiar with MENA, or I think it was a Middle Eastern, Northern African. We got to see how they advocated and fought for their disaggregation. We also got to see how other people who might be somewhat in alignment with the ADOS ideology, who maybe have a different approach or who are against what we're using as a phrase, we got to see how they operate and how they move. We really got to get in that political arena and understand what that fight looks like through that campaign. And I think that showed us, and it will help us prepare for future fights. But shout out to the outreach team. Shout out to everybody who worked on Claim the Name, whether you showed up to train, whether you submitted a letter telling your personal story and connection, as a descendant of slavery. Shout out to everybody who was involved with that. Shout out to the people who hated on us and tried to keep us from getting that disaggregation. Everyone that we interacted with was a person that we learned from and that we used to build better the next time.
Absolutely. And for those that don't know, you can go to adosfoundation.org and actually see that presentation that we presented to the Office of Management and Budget, and actually get to hear our brother Jecorey Arthur talking directly to the Office of Management and Budget about the need for disaggregation. Um, I've also seen you do other trainings with the Advocacy Foundation. And I think that that's one of the awesome things, is that people get involved and we're training them. We're helping them go advocate in their communities, assisting and building with Black agendas. Right now, the ADOS Advocacy Foundation has 10 chapters and growing. We have another launch scheduled for late this month, early next month, which will put us up to 11 chapters. Right now, I know one of the things that you pushed with the outreach team was for those members to go and start organizing in their local communities. Why do you think it's important for us to be training folks in our local community, educating them on policy, and trying to move the needle that way?
Well, I think digital organizing has its place. It's necessary in 2025 in the internet AI age to use as much technology as we can when we organize. But traditional organizing, where you're knocking on people's doors, where you're having conversations with people on their porches, where you are phone banking, calling people, using relational organizing, talking to your loved ones, those traditional tactics are tried and true. And we can't ever forget them. And I think that they make us better communicators. They make us better leaders. They make us better organizers. So a task that we recently started working on with the outreach team was go out and get that organizer experience. It's one thing to be on Zoom, to do digital work and connect with people across the country and, talk theoretically. It's very different to go out and get that experience practically. So everyone's working on different campaigns. I know here in Kentucky, we got our chapter that's working on building our agenda out. but also working on getting training for a local housing campaign to get some more funding in the city budget to address homelessness. Also working on figuring out how we can take advantage of the national trainings that are about to get offered this summer from the ADOS movement. We're trying our best to be, the best that we can be as organizers, so that when we are working with chapters, when we're working with our members, we approach it from a place of not only experience of being ADOS, but the expertise of being organizers and leaders within the movement. And what better place to get that experience than in your own city, in your county, wherever you are. So we're encouraging our members to do that right now. But eventually, the outreach team is going to come back, form like Voltron, and we're going to launch another national campaign that we desperately need you as a member to get involved with. And something that's coming up very soon will be this summer. We'll have a summer series where we offer trainings to people across the country. So if you're a member of the foundation, please make sure you register for that. If you're not a member of the foundation, you need to get registered, because we are going to have these trainings and teach you everything that you need to know about organizing. Everything that I learned from organizing in the field, from being in office, I'm ready to share all of those skill sets with you so that you can use that and practice in your own city. But you got to be a member.
JoinADOS.com is where people can sign up for membership. The ADOS Advocacy Foundation right now has chapters in Georgia, Maryland, North Carolina, New York, New Jersey, California, Mississippi, Missouri, Massachusetts, and Kentucky. You all are hearing it first here. The next chapter we'll be launching is in Florida. And that will bring our chapter count to 11, and we're going to continue to launch throughout this year. I'm expecting 4 or 5 more chapters to be launching through the most part of this year, and so we're going to continue to grow. So if you are looking to get involved, again, at joinados.com. Jecorey, just some quick questions here. If you press play on your phone right now, what song would be playing?
Probably Reincarnated by Kendrick Lamar off his recent album GNX. I was listening to that earlier, but I didn't get to finish it.
Okay. All right. And if you had to tell somebody like a quintessential album that they need to listen to get their mind right, what is it?
To get their mind right?
Yeah, to get their mind right.
Get your mind right means a lot of different things to a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say if you want to hear something that's like different, that you can kind of just vibe to and kind of reflect and think through, anything Alice Coltrane, it's just John Coltrane's
Organist
wife.
Yeah.
Harpist, incredible musician. Anything Alice Coltrane. I forgot the name of it, but she got this one album where it's just like so hypnotic, and you kind of get lost in it. But I listen to a lot of instrumental music, a lot of free ambient jazz. But also, I'm going beyond your question now. There's a few names.
No, let's go.
William Grant Still, classical musician and composer and conductor. Florence Price. So I'm specifically naming things that are more like on the instrumental side, that I hope people can explore and get into.
Right on, right on. Yo, speaking of Coltrane, to get in the zone, I be listening to Alabama. Which is the song that Coltrane made after the Birmingham church bombing in Alabama. And I just appreciate how it brings the mood forward. The other song for me is a Miles Davis rendition of Porgy and Bess, and specifically the song "Oh Prayer, Dr. Jesus," and hearing just the turmoil and the sobbing that occurs in that song kind of puts me in a place. I wouldn't expect the Alice Coltrane. You came out of left field on that one. I knew I was going to get an interesting answer. And again, this speaks to the multifacetedness. So he just finished playing some Kendrick Lamar, and now we're talking about Alice Coltrane. This is just the type of guy that we're dealing with here as Jecorey Arthur. Um, last question, our last group of questions. Um, can you tell me about the importance of family? Like we've talked about you as a musician, we've talked about you as an organizer and a councilman, but you're also a father. The importance of family and legacy for you, and how that drives your advocacy and your work.
I didn't really have a very politically involved family growing up. Later in life, I'm learning that like my grandmother's been a union organizer for years. But growing up, I just didn't know, or maybe I didn't pay attention enough. So I say that just because the work that I'm doing, the work that you're doing, the work that we are doing right now is so important because we're establishing a foundation, literally and figuratively, for our kids to later stand on top of and continue that work. And I bring that up just to like, be super clear about like the importance of politics. At the same time, my family is my place of of rest, my place of comfort, my place of solitude. Because if I didn't have my kids to play with at the end of a long day, if I didn't have my woman to talk with and vent with and be with, I could not maintain the work that I have. And I don't think they could maintain, the work that they have, whether it's, going to school, going to daycare, dealing with what my woman deals with at work. We need each other and we support each other in so many ways that I can't even put into words how important it is to have your family, whether it's your kids, your partner, or just whoever your family is, you know, through blood or through choice. You got to make sure that you have a supportive social circle during this work because it can just really drain the life out of you. And I think that our families help recharge us. So family is utmost importance.
Yo, I love that. For those that want to know more about Jecorey Arthur, you can go to jecoreyarthur.com, Jecorey Arthur, Arthur.com. For those that want to know more about the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, you can go to adosfoundation.com. That's ADOS Foundation.org. I'm sorry, adosfoundation.org. Also, we are in the middle, the ADOS Advocacy Foundation is in the middle of a campaign to write a comprehensive reparations bill for ADOS. That campaign is named Justice for Generations. Every little bit counts. Getting the bill written is not a cheap thing. So even if you just have $3, that $3 can make a difference and you can take part in history. adosfoundation.org. I'm Simeon with the Critical Mass Podcast. Jecorey, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I was so looking forward to this interview and getting to talk and chop it up with you. Do you have any final words for our audience before we get out of here?
Thank you to everyone who volunteers and builds community with ADOS. Again, if you're not a member, please make sure you become a member right now so you can get access to all of these benefits, trainings, building the skills that you need so that we can fight for future generations. Power to the people, especially ADOS.
Right on. Thanks again, Jecorey. You all take care and have a great rest of your day or evening.